Hello and welcome to One Take. I'm your host, Dale Kirshner. One Take is a discussion in which one CEO provides his or her take on how best to deal with the most pressing business and economic issues of the day. It's also called One Take because this is a recorded live, continuous dialogue with no editing. One Take is brought to you by the Platinum Group, which for nearly 40 years has specialized in helping business leaders navigate through challenging times, ranging from selling their businesses, raising capital, and refinancing, to surviving tough financial setbacks, legal challenges, and crisis situations. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to Mark Stutrud, founder and president of Summit Brewing Company, one of the nation's first craft breweries that Mark started back in 1986. Mark, welcome to One Take.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you've weathered plenty of Oh, sorry, what's that, Mark?
I just said it's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, thank you. You know, you've weathered plenty of challenges over those 34 years since starting Summit. Comparing today with everything that you've gone through, what's different about today, and what are some things that you learned in the past that you're able to tap today to survive the COVID-19 situation?
Well, certainly the competitive landscape is considerably different. As everyone knows, there are several thousand breweries in the United States today. And just regionally and within the metro area, there's a number of breweries. And then also with a number of breweries, there's numerous types of business plans. We've seen a major shift of small breweries really focused on on-premise sales, and that is selling their beer on site at their brewery. Our bread and butter has been based on making direct relationships with our distributors, retail customers, be they restaurants, bars, or liquor stores. And we need to have those strong connections before we can actually effectively get our beer to our customers. So we are at a certain scale to where we're way beyond having most of our business on premise. I mean, that actually represents less than 1%. So just learning on how to successfully expand our operation and our relationships. The beer business is incredibly competitive. There are some big boys that do not want to lose market share. That's where our success comes from, getting market share from them. And then now we also have a lot of smaller breweries that are competitive in a very localized manner. So when you put all of this competitive mix together on top of this COVID-19 crisis, literally it's wiped out 40% of our business, which is restaurants and bars. And so that's been challenging. The fact that I have a very strong leadership team at this point in time, we were able to redesign the budget for this year about 5 times during between mid-March and mid-April. We got to a place where we felt very comfortable and confident that we would execute that plan. And to date, we're a little bit ahead of that. So this is a long answer to your question, but I've learned how to be pretty conservative in my assumptions.
Well, that's good. But boy, interesting, all the things that have changed. And, you know, on the outside, we hear reports about how liquor sales have been really strong at the liquor stores. And then I think about how you've been less premise sales and more into liquor stores and restaurants. I didn't really think about the 40% decline on the restaurant side, though. That's pretty significant. And what do you see as the restaurants coming back? I mean, right now, as we talk, they're back to being able to do, I believe, 50% capacity. And what do you think you'll see now, let's say in July, when it comes to those sales in restaurants and bars?
I think the re-entry, so to speak, of consumers back into bars and restaurants will be very gradual. There's an attitude of uncertainty, how people are going to interact with each other is a very personal decision. And to be honest, I think that some of the restaurant trade, the hospitality business has had many challenges. So, even though 50% capacity, I think for some restaurants and bars, I've doggone, I've got a sign here that my speaker's not working, but
you're breaking up a little bit sometimes, but I can hear you most of the time.
Okay, all right. I was hoping not to have a technical problem. I checked out all this stuff earlier. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
But going back to my point is that for some establishments, if they hit 50% capacity, they might be doing pretty well, because struggling. And there's some hot places, but there are also some places that have been pretty slow, and we've seen several restaurants close even before this pandemic. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm optimistic. People will return to bars and restaurants. We're social creatures inherently, and we will figure out how to do it. But with the physical distancing, that doesn't concern me as much. How this virus continues to evolve, and how we need to get on top of how it spread more effectively, and hopefully have a vaccine or some effective treatment.
I've heard some reports that there may not be as many beer options in some of the restaurants as we get back to a different kind of normal. What are you hearing and seeing?
Definitely the restaurateurs are focused on their core business. They're looking at more volume amongst a select number of brands. This is also in the consumer behavior freezing or experimental consumption, where they're always seeking out whatever's new that particular week. So these restaurateurs they're actually offering fewer draft beers, even fewer brands in package. And they're doing that to be conservative with their approach again in terms of how many offerings they have out there. And they also, during this pandemic, Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors, they've experienced.
Yep. You break up a little bit here and there, but I still think we can hear you for the most part. So if it gets really bad, I'll ask you to repeat something.
Okay, I'm very sorry. I'm not quite sure what's happening here.
The nature of this beast called Zoom, but at least it works as well as it does. How do you compete with this type of situation, Mark? I know the distributor relationships are really key. And then you also have your relationships with the bars and the restaurants. So tell us a little bit about how Summit's doing with the distributors. And you have a new beer that's coming out right now, and yet these distributors are having their own problems to deal with, and you need them to help market that new beer. So how are you, kind of juggling all those things?
Well, first of all, one of the difficulties of redesigning our budget had to do with the fact that we really needed to keep our sales team intact. That was a difficult decision, but I'm really glad that we kept our sales team together and did not furlough anyone. I know several distributors that furloughed their sales staff. So we've had a presence on the street. Our sales team has been working very closely with the liquor stores, even assisting in stocking shelves and, having, maintaining that connection. And then for all the restaurants and bars that closed, if they weren't doing curbside, at least there was some telephonic dialogue. That's been key, but most importantly, we've also been extremely supportive of our distributors. In that, for example, now that bars and restaurants are gradually reopening, myself and other folks on the sales team have been doing a lot of quality checks of the draft beer and assisting our retail customers with troubleshooting with their draft beer systems. And one of the things we want to make sure is that now that places are reopening, that they have fresh beer on draft. And so we're also double checking with our distributors to make sure that they've been following through the past 4 weeks of where we had a policy of where we were returning kegs to our from our distributor and then giving them 100% credit, which was rare among suppliers. Usually it's a 50-50 split. So we've intensified our street efforts with our distributors. We're very present with our retail customers. And then internally, there's been a lot of work to make sure that order fulfillment and inventory control is very tight so that we're very efficient and very effective on this end.
Yeah, 100% credit. That's pretty incredible. I haven't heard of any other brewery doing that.
Well, we were the only brewery nationally that took that position. I do want to say it was a calculation. Didn't have a lot of inventory out there to begin with.
You broke up a little bit there. What was it?
I was saying that this 100% credit was a calculated risk in that we, due to our effective inventory, we had fewer kegs out there in the retail level than maybe some of our other competitors out there.
Yeah. So what, you think about what you've just gone through in the last 3 months. What from all this are some lessons that you've learned with your team that you may be able to share with other business leaders that maybe you did things differently this time around than you've done in the past? Anything like that?
Well, nurturing our work culture here is always essential, and that's really reinforced how important that is. So it really comes back to the basics of having a plan, but being able to articulate that plan very clearly so that the expectations of all of ourselves is very clear. So communication is key, but also I think it's been very, very important to take time to listen. By listening to someone respond to something I may say, I heard the message. And at the same time, it opens up the door for them to get engaged in dialogue, and also, they're fully prepared to share their ideas. I think that's been really essential.
Mm-hmm. And then how have you, did you have to change things a lot at the brewery? I mean, you were already a food processing type of business, so you already had a lot of health and safety issues already in place. But how have you had to change how you actually do what you do at the brewery?
Well, we certainly have intensified sanitation protocol that has to do with personal hygiene and wellness, and obviously sanitation is key. People always say brewing is in 1% brewing, but we've got about 50% of our staff have been working off-site, and we've ended up putting in place protocol to protect the health and the wellness of the brewing, quality, and packaging teams. So it's been a designed isolation, so to speak, to where almost every department of this operation, for them to conduct their business, we have to do it with this physical distancing in so many ways. We've certainly stopped any visits from people from the outside unless they're essential vendors or suppliers. We continue to have meetings outside to date. If small groups of people need to get together for planning or strategic execution, what have you, until we figure out how this virus works, we're in a very strong protection mode of the core teams that produce and package the beer and ship it out. So that's been quite surreal, because this organization is composed of a bunch of individuals who are extremely social. So.
Yep. Speaking of which, your Rathskeller, which is where the public can come in and enjoy your beers right there on premise. What are your plans with that for the summer?
Well, we have no date as yet of when we're going to reopen the Rathskeller. I know people that have been disappointed with our decision to defer our opening and to delay it. And it's for us to to control that exposure to protect our staff. It's a tough thing to say like this previously, because we're in the hospitality business and we want to welcome people to this place. And now when we're overtly stay away, that's a pretty foreign experience for us.
Yeah, plus the state fair. I know you love being at the state fair, and that's out this year. And speaking of the state fair, Triumph, your new beer, you introduced it at the state fair last year. I don't recall if it was the name then, it might have been, but it's an interesting beer in that it's a low carb IPA, I believe. And tell us a little bit about that beer, and how has COVID-19 affected the rollout of that?
Okay. First of all, when we introduced this beer at the state fair last year, we called it Minnesotan. It was certainly, the beauty of the state fair is that we use the state fair to actively market test a brand. Mm-hmm. And we really seek feedback, and then we have another several months to fine tune this. So this low carb, low cal, lower ABV IPA has been a real hit, and the brand name is Triumph. So going back to COVID, that is totally upset all of our plans of execution. We had hoped to have a full marketing release and release of both draft and packaged beer for Triumph in the beginning of May. Our release date today, in terms of the full marketing push and the push through the distributors, is going to be sometime, I would say, within the next 6 weeks. And I would say shortly we'll be releasing some information on the release of this brand, but it's really had a very a positive reception with with the consumers, and it really hits that sweet spot of where you have low cal, lower alcohol, low carbs, but a very aromatic, flavorful beer. So we're again, I feel like we've been stuck for about 3 months, and we still have that same experience for Triumph.
Yep. Well, it's a dang good beer, and my stomach appreciates it. It's I love all your beers, but it's a nice light beer, and it's nice that it's low carb.
Yeah, and it's a part of our variety pack,
Mm-hmm.
and but the next step is to really, release it on draft and in package. And again, when we have this situation of where bars and restaurants are contracting the number of their offerings, that makes your execution a little bit more difficult than normal. So we're carefully planning, how to make this maneuver.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I actually got your sampler pack probably about 2 weeks ago. And I'm out on the boat and I grab a beer out of the cooler and I just know it's a Summit. And I'm drinking this beer and I'm like, boy, this is good. It's lighter than usual. And I look at Triumph and I hadn't heard of it. But then I noticed that it's that low carb beer. So I'm glad it's coming out. But boy, it must be really frustrating to have these kinds of challenges come up when it comes to the marketing rollout.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that that specific brand has been a little over 2 years in development.
Mm-hmm.
Because before we even released it at the state fair last year, Damien and the brewing team had about 8 months already invested in designing and fine tuning this great beer.
Yeah, yeah, and I know that there used to be talk that it was thought to be almost impossible to make a good IPA that would be low carb. So it's cool that they pulled it off.
Yeah.
Mark, anything else that you'd like to share with other business leaders, business owners, in terms of how to navigate today's economy? Some people say that with the stimulus funding and things that we've had, it's been kind of an artificial keeping all boats floating, and that in another month or two, as that stimulus spending kind of is no longer there, that we're really going to see more of an effect on the economy. So what are your thoughts about where we're heading economically? A lot of optimism out there right now, but there are also those people saying, well, we're not so sure. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's essential to have reserves to weather through times like this. This certainly has been a very, you'll know that business and industries go through cycles. And typically, some of these cycles can be predictable, but then again, we always need to be prepared to deal with an unknown. And for example, an unknown for us is that I never imagined the brewing industry would be in the shape that it is today, even with the number of breweries, the shift in business models, kind of the impingement on the on-premise business and restaurants. So it's essential that you have the resources so that you can weather several tough months. And that's my speaker is, am I chopping up again?
You broke up just in the last 10 seconds.
Oh. it's just essential that you patience, I think, is also an important quality. And it's very important to continue to think long term. It's easy to get into responding to issues in the here and now or the present moment. And it's important not to stay preoccupied. It's important to stick with the details on a day-to-day basis and making sure that you're controlling expenses, relationships. But at the same time, it's essential not to be so preoccupied with the crisis itself and get outside of yourself and start thinking longer. Because after all, that's another thing, that's how business works. We're in this for the long haul. That's just a point of view that I have, I guess.
Yeah. Sometimes I talk with people and I ask, it seems like some businesses are so busy trying to put out fires right now and try to handle all the different things that are coming up. They can't think long term. How have you managed those types of scenarios in the past and more recently? But how do you do both?
Well, I've been involved in plenty of crisis management over the years. And even in my previous profession, when I worked in a hospital-based treatment program, that's the core of your work is crisis management. Mm-hmm. The critical issue is to really have a strong leadership team. And I'm very blessed with just having the people around me and that are in charge of this organization. But then again, it took about 30 years to get to this point to where I was really able to identify those individuals, to nurture them, to foster their development, to work hard in terms of managing my own control issues, to let them be in charge and be empowered and to do the things that they need to do. I know I'm saying a lot of stuff that other people say, but that's what I work hard on a daily basis, is to really nurture this team that has really been working very successfully together. And it's just it's a pleasure to watch them work today. And that's what continues to motivate me, is the teams I have. And certainly I've learned, in the past, I was certainly followed through with Murphy's principle of where you promote someone to their next level of incompetence, and where you take some really good people, but I've learned that to identify management skills and the potential of developing management skills within individuals much more effectively than I did even 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so being active in terms of getting folks in the proper positions, and also be able to identify people within the organization that certainly have the aspirations and the basic skill set to be involved in management. There are plenty of people that are satisfied to just do what they do well. And sometimes it's best not to promote them, mm-hmm. but also learn how to reward them and can compensate them in other ways so that they stay as an integral part of this team.
Yep. Hey, Mark, is there anything else that I should have asked you? I mean, I could keep talking with you all day if you had the time, but one last thing that we should have talked about that we didn't?
Well, I can't really think of anything right now that's that I would add to what I've said so far.
Okay.
I'm more preoccupied with my damn speaker on this end.
Well, I think it worked for the most part. So I think it's good. And, you know, it's one take. So it is what it is. But Mark, thank you very much for joining us today for this one take.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank our sponsor once again, the Platinum Group, which for 40 years has helped companies during turbulent times. If your company can use some advice or just a second opinion, contact the Platinum Group. You can find them online at theplatinumgrp.com. And thank you to all of you for tuning in today. We'll see you next time on One Take.